Let me introduce our more important speaker of the evening, Joel Fontenot. Joel is managing partner of Trailblazer. Sorry, that was a
You wanted to say Triton.
I did say Trailblazer Capital. Joel leverages his unique insights gained from his experience in banking, investing, and operating early-stage companies to make and manage venture investments. Previously, Mr. Fontenot worked for Cisco Systems, where he, at Cisco, joined the acquisition through an acquisition of Meteos Corporation, where Joel had served as the CEO and founder of that company. Joel is a former board member of Spawn Labs, a Trailblazer investment he led and sold to GameStop in 2011. He serves on the board of directors of NetSoccer Inc., Coupon Media, and Cyclewood Solutions. Mr. Fontenot is an executive board member of the Bobby B. Lyle School of Engineering at SMU, and is a board of Sister Saint Preparatory School. He was appointed to serve on the Texas Emerging Technology Fund Advisory Committee, and Joel holds a BA in Economics from the University of Texas at Austin, thank you, Joel, and an MBA from Southern Methodist University, SMU. And so tonight we're going to hear about, this is the first in the series of Money Talks, and Joel, I understand you've just closed a new venture fund, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that and what Trailblazer Capital is all about.
Would be happy to. So I know Laura's going to want to make this interactive, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. I really like to talk and mix it up with the crowd a lot more than lecture, especially from a seat. But I thought I would just explain briefly what's happening within the venture world, if that's okay with Laura, and then she can stop me if I get too verbose along the way. Trailblazer Capital is an early stage venture capital fund. We have closed our second fund, the only new and or emerging and or existing venture fund in Texas to close two funds, the first in 2009, the second just recently formally closed, but is an 11 vintage year fund. We have about $35 million under management, which is very small, and that's what I want to talk about today, is a changing landscape of venture capital. Hopefully you'll find that interesting from a Money Talks perspective, because it impacts, for those of you who want to start businesses, especially in technology, both here in Texas as well as elsewhere. Texas is a lot tougher place to get capital than it used to be. And so what we talk about a lot with venture partners is what's begun to change in the venture world, and a lot of it, as you can see on these slides, is the old way of doing business is the new way. So firms like the stalwart firms like Microsoft, Cisco, and the others, along with the emerging companies that are new to the world, relatively speaking, Google and Facebook, are really the powerhouses that drive a lot of what goes on in the venture market. Our job is to put money at risk, but it is also to return those funds in vintage year funds. So our goal is clearly, we like to laugh a lot at Trailblazer Capital about portraits of dead presidents. We give out Washington, and we like, Lincoln, or some better yet, someone more important back. And the best of all is a non-president, Franklin, when he comes back home. Those work really well, because at the most bottom line you can get is rate of return for a fund. So our job is to deploy capital wisely and return that capital so that we have the opportunity to deploy new capital and start the sort of squirrel cage run all over again. And so what's been going on in the venture market is something very, very interesting. There's been this disintermediation, and I want to talk just briefly about that, because what micro VC means is small fund. Micro is 25, and some people say the upper bounds of that are 100 million. I would say the upper bound of that is about 60 million. So these funds that are between 20 and 60 million dollars, and why they need to be working and can work far better than other funds. Every time I turn, I'm going to lose my mic. So what's changed is contributing to this is the washout of the bust in 2001. What also contributed is the slowdown in 2008. Large, giant funds emerging, meaning uber funds like a Sequoia Capital, the kinds of very, very large funds that have super huge brand names. and then a huge washout of other funds. At the same time, in starting up a technology business in particular, it's become significantly cheaper to do so. And we can talk in depth about that if you want to ask questions about it. But because of things like Amazon Cloud Services, a lot of software that's out there in open source code, the dramatic reduction of the cost and time and energy to get something onto a network. How many of you have a mobile phone in your pocket? Okay, you're on the network. You know how hard that was to do in 2000? It was significantly harder. So I've thrown in a couple slides to sort of emphasize what's going on. And these, if you can read them, will show you what's going on in the M&A world. Because remember, we put money to work, but we only put money to work with the expectation we're going to get it back. And a micro VC is very, very, very focused on exit and a very short window to exit and a churn of capital. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, a smaller fund means less fee income. Less fee income means we sort of starve until we provide our limited partners with a huge return on capital. And that's what keeps us going. And I think that has been the biggest contributor to the change in venture capital. There's been a huge washout of all the funds that are in sort of the 500 million down phase. And that's because the venture partners forgot that return of capital. Fee income kills this incentive, and this misalignment of interest has really killed off a lot of the mid-tier funds. I want to talk about that. I like to show this slide because what's more important is if you can look over time, look at the way the change of players has moved from the 5-year history to the more recent history. You'll see companies like Cisco and Microsoft falling off the list, which is really, really interesting when you think about it, and companies like Facebook marching to the top along with Google. So happy to talk about that further, but I'm trying to build a case about the shakeout in the middle. And the shakeout in the middle is really caused by a couple of pretty interesting factors. This is I think one of the most interesting slides in venture capital. And what it's showing you is exit value over time. And what can you tell me about the trend line here? It's made up. There is no trend, right? Did you see on the list there's a less than a year-old company worth $1 billion, and there's 10-year-old companies worth, you know, $100,000. That venture capitalist wasn't very happy. So what's happening in this slide is that the bottom line lesson is venture capital is not something you can financially manage the same way you would a private equity fund for the finance people in the room. You cannot manage it the same way you would do a hedge fund, which is primarily dealing with publicly traded securities. It's rather random in a lot of cases, and at times can make no sense whatsoever. You know, for those of you who tried to buy Facebook stock when it went public versus the value today, you know, sometimes hype doesn't meet the expectation, and in some cases, Google stock is the exact opposite. So I like to show this slide because you have to be smaller and more nimble can have a very meaningful impact to the performance of the venture fund and the companies you're backing because of this chart. That one got blown up. And then the last one I want to show you why micro or smaller VC funds make sense is that as you read this slide, keep in mind a couple of really important facts is that very few funds greater than 200 million return capital. And the bulk of funds that return capital are the smaller funds. And that's because there's this specific drive of those partners to provide a rate of return to the fund. And so what's happened inside the marketplace is meets that principle. A lot of the middle tier funds have gone away. And what you're left with are very, very large funds and now an emerging set of micro VC funds. And that's the same that can be said for Texas. You have one giant bellwether. It's here locally. It's called Austin Ventures. And then you have basically 5 scrappy small guys. And I can name all the general partners and the funds, and we can get into it. So it's been a pretty remarkable change in the market. And we can talk a little bit in length, too, about what's gone on in my history. So I began in the middle 90s doing a partnership and was lucky enough to get some experience doing a couple of startups. I think Laura's going to ask some questions about those, but I had a mentor by the name of Terry Rock at Centerpoint Ventures, one of those middle-tier funds who's no longer with us, tell me that I needed to go get some experience as an operator because I was just a finance puke, I think is how he put it, meaning I had my MBA and I was a banker, meaning an old-fashioned banker, not an investment banker. And he thought I needed some operating experience. And I had the good fortune in the year 2000, not necessarily great timing, but in the year 2000, start my first company, which is a company that invented session border control. Met a very interesting scientist by the name of Vic Bennett, who helped start a company here called EIR, which was one of the first ever fast pattern processors to make it to commercialization. And we created something called session border control, which is already boring, a lot of you can see, but the idea there was to emulate circuits in the big internet protocol world, and that's basically the idea of the company. We were hammered hard by competitors out of California, one in particular called Acme Packet, who's worth billions of dollars today. NetRake was sold off for chump change in 2007 after I ceremoniously got kicked out by the lead VC, One Austin Ventures. So off to figure out.
Do you want to tell us any more about this, Joe?
Off to
I just have a feeling you want to share.
Well, you know, you can't, if you're trying to pivot and no one wants to pivot, then what ends up happening is you do your own personal pivot.
That was
with a lot of help. Preferably one of these in the backside. So I did my own personal pivot.
But you learned things from the process, right?
It was a tremendous experience. $75 million went into NetRake, and $10 million came out. So you think about that. That math, if you keep that up, it's sort of like the federal government. Eventually you'll go bankrupt. But the second startup we did actually through a connection that Laura knows, was backed by a firm here locally called Covera. At the time, it was called Hunt Ventures, and one Steve Coffey, who I've known for many, many years. And I beat him about the head until he finally funded his first ever lead investment.
Right.
I told him he needed to quit being a flunky for the big guys and back someone for a change by himself. And we started a little company here in Austin, Texas called Metrios, which is a pun on meteor, because we were going to blow away the phone business like a meteor blows away planets. And or so the 23-year-old co-founder with me at the time decided. And I didn't want to change the name, it was too good. That one we learned a lot. We only took in $3.6 million of funding, and we sold it for greater than 10 times that to Cisco Systems 18 months after the venture round, just a little over 3 years from the start of the company. And that's where I was quietly resting investing when I was approached by a guy who's the son-in-law of one Sam Wiley. Now, Sam Wiley is a very interesting character, and for those of you who don't know, you're lucky in this world if you can build a single billion-dollar company. Sam Wiley has built 6 billion-dollar companies, 2 companies worth of $4 billion each. He started with $1 million of seed funding in the early 80s and sold in March of 2000. To one to AT&T and the other to CA.
Wow, 1 month before the debacle, the dot-com crash.
Exactly, 1 month before the debacle. And the reason why he sold those 2 companies, do you know the story? Have I told you this?
No, tell us the story.
Laura knows this one well. It's because one company by the name of Green Mountain Energy could not get public. And he felt that if a solid company like Green Mountain could not be public, then all of it was a joke. So he liquidated everything.
And in full disclosure, I was an investor, a very early investor, pre-product in Green Mountain.
That's correct.
That ultimately sold in 2010 to NRG for $350+ million. But sold, was not taken public.
Correct. It was sold for a lot of dough. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of dough. We like that.
Yeah, so
But
it wasn't quite Franklin, but it was, you know.
It was, yeah. It was still good.
Like a Hamilton.
It was like Hamilton. But Sam Wiley is an exceptional entrepreneur.
He is an exceptional entrepreneur, and it's one we believe in. He believes wholeheartedly, like I do. He's a Louisiana boy. My family has its background in Louisiana. There's a lot of commonality, and the most important one is this belief, and this is going to sound crazy, that venture capital in and of itself is quite virtuous. So I'm a venture capitalist. I wear the dark hat most of the time, but we fundamentally believe in its ability to be virtuous. And I'm going to explain that and why micro VC and any VC funds or people willing to pool capital to take risk are extremely important. It's because true wealth and true breakout and taking true advantage of new inventions don't happen unless you can take that kind of risk with capital. And America's in a really unique position, more so than any other country on the planet Earth, that this ability to take risk and to fail is rewarded. My son, who joined the room a few minutes ago, along with another son of mine, had been debating this for a while, that it's not necessary that the Puritans came here with a work ethic, or the Germans came here with a work ethic, or the Chinese or whoever. It's that those people took tremendous amount of risk to get here. And when they did, they had to wear a lot of different hats and make things happen. Some they were good at, some they weren't. But the bottom line is they all eventually succeeded. And that's very important. So venture capital is virtuous. Why? Because if I were to give you $1 million for your idea, and you turn that $1 million into personal wealth, you're going to do things with that personal wealth. And what you end up doing, if you do it really well, is you end up building schools, funding university programs, and making the community a better place. That is virtuous. And that we don't want to ever get away from. And that is what I really loved and why I left my career at Cisco Systems, which was really quite boring, I might add, to start and do this micro VC fund. Because at the core of it, I wanted to be able to back people like me because I had now been in the industry for quite some time. So remember, I suffered through, I barely got out of undergraduate. I don't know why the university gave me a degree, but I barely got out. And I spent a lot of years in banking, then went and got a graduate degree. And as my wife says, why did you go back into banking? But spent 10 years in banking so that I could get to private equity, because I've always been attracted by private equity, specifically venture capital. I think it's really, really interesting stories. There's a lot of great stories, specifically post-World War II in the U.S. And so we wanted to go and do this venture capital idea because fundamentally we believed that it's virtuous to do so. Secondly, I just didn't do a great job explaining why I looked at the financial world and decided that the venture capitalists had it wrong. And as the sheep are headed towards Sequoia and the big boys, NEA and all those guys, they're going to do okay. But the biggest chunk of the world can't go join a Sequoia fund right now. It's rather full, thank you very much. And I looked at what happened in the middle, and it seemed to make very good sense that Texas was a place to be, that early stage venture capital was a great way to make some things happen. And so we started on this experiment. And what we are today is we are true to that fund. We have some certain characteristics I showed you, I flashed up there. One is it's a small fund, so we barely keep the lights on. We live for what's called the profits interest. There's only 4 of us. We only do a small number of deals. We spend a lot of time with those deals. We shepherd them from literally slideware on up. In fact, because I'm here today, tomorrow morning I will create a company in this building and get it funded. It will be hatched here, funded here, and driven from here as its birthplace.
That's pretty phenomenal.
That's what you have to do. You have to find talented people, excellent ideas, and capital, put them together, and shepherd them to the next step. And there's few people left to do that. When I was starting Metrios, 2 of my term sheets for much higher pre-money values were California-based firms. One I'll mention, Mayfield, gave me a map. And on the map was Burlingame, California. Anyone been to Burlingame? Anyone? Anyone? Right, where is it? Just outside of? Right. And there's a dot where his office was. in a red circle, and I could be anywhere in that dot I wanted to be. So I had to pick up, leave Texas, and go to California. Well, let me just tell you, that wasn't going to happen. What are most people doing today? They're picking up and going where?
Texas.
Austin, Texas. So what are we doing in this VC fund? So here's a little hint. How much am I okay time-wise?
You're okay time-wise.
So here's what we're doing. So we're looking at $500,000. The smallest check is $25,000 I've written to create a new plastic out of lignin, which is completely biodegradable. Yes, indeed, it's true. And we actually have created plastic now with that on a mere $250,000 with a team I met out at Rice University, all the way up to a company trying to change the way the internet infrastructure works yet again. It's called NetSocket. It has well over $20 million invested in it, and it's changing the way hosted communications will work in the near future. I don't want to get into it more than that, but I can. I just don't want to bore you. So that portfolio is rather strange, and it's a mix of interesting things. We put very little money in, up to about $5 million. We can only do that in about 8 transactions in the current fund. And so what do we focus on? It's what we focus on, the partners and I, what we have experience in, telecommunications, semiconductor, mobility. But we've made a slide to make it easier so that even our LPs can understand what it is we're focused on and promoting. So first and foremost, this belief that venture capital is virtuous. By backing the entrepreneur, we'll make our communities a better place, create jobs, do great stuff. But remember, there's always the profit motive back there, because I want to be able to, pay, college tuition.
Or go on great vacations.
Or go on great vacations, but I think I told you my last one.
Oh, you showed me the photos.
And so we're on 4 primary areas, and I'm going to start the first by saying cloud. And for those of you who are not technical, all the cloud means is the internet protocol network, so the big giant network we're all plugged into. This gentleman's drastically reaching into his pocket to turn off his phone. Why? Because we're all attached to the cloud, right? We could not imagine. How many of you cannot imagine your adult life without a telephone? Go ahead, be honest. All the young people for sure should have their hands up. Raise your hand. Can't imagine life without a phone. You lived 2 months without it? Was it misery? So this idea of the cloud is pretty interesting, and this is the idea that the network itself is so prolific, we just refer to it in one general term, the cloud, the noun that now means all of what the internet has known and become. And there's tons and tons of really interesting stuff related to how this cloud works that has to be solved daily. The very first thing that had to be solved was this little thing called session border control, but of course I told you that and it was boring because it was 12 years ago. But without even session border control or dual NAT, which stands for dual network address translation, or all these kinds of things, we couldn't do what we're doing today. And there's a lot of very smart engineers out there who are fixing the problems that exist as this network becomes its own big giant monster. So we love everything to do with the cloud, but let's translate that to be the internet infrastructure, anything related to the internet infrastructure. Next on my lovely list is SOLO-MO, or MO-LO-SO, or SO-ME-DO-ME-DO. But really that's just a way to say social, location, and mobility, or vice versa, mobility, location, and social. Because of that, again, device in your pocket and how you act and react. And mostly anyone under the age of 30 now, and speaking to you, everything you do has this rather interesting device associated with it. So the fact that you're connected, the fact that you want to share what you're doing a lot, and you're willing to let people know and understand you and where you are is really, really important. And we can talk more about that. Because the last point, which is called big data, just simply means that because of all of this happening, and there's a lot that goes into figuring out and understanding human behavior. How can we understand you better? How can we provide you better service? How can we do things that you want to have done? And so the last point I'd like to make is the combination of all those things. And specifically the 4 big things that it takes to be a real company in this world nowadays. 1, become a node on the network. That's easy to do. In 1999, when I was trying to figure this stuff out, it was not easy to be a node on the network. It was extremely difficult to be a node on the network. 2, gather information automatically, easily. That's happening all the time. Most of you have a location turned on your phone right now. If not, the phone knows you're here anyway, or whatever it is. But it's gathering information constantly. And then you're going to want to integrate that information into another application of some sort. I'm going to talk about an example of this in just a sec. And so once that information is now integrated into other business logic or your own personal logic, let's say how seamlessly you can create a calendar function. Or someone sends you a meet me invite and blammo, it's there and the reminder's there. Or how you're telling the phone to remind you to do something, whether it's through voice or just through having to actually punch it in. And then the 4th and the most important thing is you're going to be able to enable someone to monetize the first 3 things. And they're going to do that through taking action in some way, shape, or form to, again, provide you something you want in your life. And there's lots and lots of interesting examples of this. I'm going to give one portfolio example, and then I'm just going to give one personal example of the future. So my portfolio example would be a company called Coupon Media. How many of you, and be honest, read print newspapers? So that is generally far more than normal when I ask that question in a room. How many of you have a subscription to that newspaper, or you just pick it up? So very few young people. So how many of you watch broadcast television without TiVoing it or recording it? Okay, very few. Now, if it's a non-sporting event, how many of you watch broadcast television? No one.
Zip.
1. Without TiVo. Because you're going to hop. Or you're going to skip. Right? Right? How many of you ever watch a commercial? Come on. If you don't have to, do you watch a commercial? Let's put it that way. So how in this... Okay, that's the only event ever that people will watch. And most people don't watch the game because it stinks, so you only watch the commercial. So here we go. Changing world, isn't it? Solo-mo, or whatever you want to say. So location mobility, and this idea that you're connected to the network. You know, there's people who spend a lot of money. Do you know what's spent on print ads a year in the United States of America? It's a ginormous number. Hundreds of billions of dollars. Hundreds of billions. Do you know how many print coupons there are in the U.S. annually in just consumer packaged goods? 650 billion. How many are being used? And guess what? The first time you used a coupon in 1898 for Coca-Cola, it has not changed to today. Did you know that coupon, if you use one, is bundled with a bunch of other coupons, air freighted to Mexico, where they sort them and key punch them, and then 2 weeks later, if you're Coke, you might be paying 7-Eleven, or Pepsi, you might be paying 7-Eleven for the right to have used that coupon, but there's no audit. And then, how do I know you used the coupon? You right there, how do I know you used it? Yes, I'm looking at you. I have no idea. Is that not old school or what? Doesn't that seem stupid? So we're going to solve that. We're going to use it. You have questions, don't worry. I got to get this done in 2 minutes or she's going to yank my chain. So look. That's what Coupon Media does. That phone in your pocket, they know you've got it. We have a closed loop system that enables retailers and brands to work together to offer you a coupon, and only you can use it. No one else, just you. And when you do use it, they know it. And when you use it, guess what? They send you another. And they like that, because you know what? No paper, no shipments to Mexico, And all the data they didn't have any idea about, they now have. Now think about that. That's really important. All those dollars that are spent in today, and you think Google's big now and you don't want to spend whatever it is, $700 for a share of stock, buy. You don't want to know why? All of that print media and all of that old school digital media, it's all moving. Billions and billions of dollars, and it's moving to these new platforms. Today, I'll let you know a little secret. I think this is the first news, but today, companies like Pepsi and 7-Eleven are able to offer you not only something really cool, here's a discount if you go to 7-Eleven and buy a Pepsi, but now 7-Eleven can go, hey, you came in last time, why don't you come back and get a free bag of chips, Frito-Lay, and come to the same 7-Eleven. And they know that about you. And you know what? You're willing to say, you can come into my life because you've given me value. That's extremely important, and that blends everything we're talking about into something really unique. And that's what we do.
Joel, but another aspect of what you're doing with this company, you can do because of the technology that's available today. Absolutely. And the capital efficient use of the money you're investing into that company.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's very, very cheap to build companies nowadays. This company, Coupon Media, had $1.5 million of seed funding. We'll put another $4.5 million into it, and it might go through a growth round of capital. It might not. So when it's all said and done, it will probably have less than $10 million invested into it. And the average, I think I had it on one of the slides nowadays, before M&A exits, about $13 or so million, and that number is falling because it's just easier because of access to the node, access to programming. You can do test environments on the cloud. There's so much more. A number of studies have been done. It's more than an order of magnitude cheaper to start a company today than it was in the 2000 time frame.
Talk about the time frame, though, of those capital efficient companies and getting them to exit. You talked earlier on, your model is quick. As quick as possible.
As quick as possible.
You're incented to do that.
I'm extremely incented to do that, and I've proven now a couple times over that you can get a company from nothing to exit in 18 months. In our first fund, we created a company here in town called Spawn Labs. Spawn Labs created the first ever remote transport for asynchronous gameplay. We did that because we said Netflix crushed Blockbuster, someone's going to crush GameStop. Wouldn't it be great to invent the company that helps GameStop prevent itself from being crushed? And we did that right here in the city of Austin, as a matter of fact. We funded that company in September of '09 and sold it to GameStop for about a 5 times turn on capital in a little less than 18 months. So that's what we're really, really focused on. The reason I wanted to show you those exit stats and who's buying is because a majority of early stage technology companies are sold through M&A. We are the weapons creators that let them continue to fight the battle. Cisco and Microsoft have sort of dropped off the list, but I can guarantee you Cisco and Microsoft will come back up onto that list, and so will HP, because the primary way they compete is through acquisition of emerging technologies. And so if you have a team with relevant domain expertise within a certain area, you can figure out by testing the marketplace whether or not that technology, if it grabs a hold, can do anything. And if it can, you can get it sold between 18 months and 3 years, and we've proven it several times over.
How do you consider the team? How do you look at the team? You know, you've got the technology, you've got the idea, you think there's a marketplace. What do you do with the team? We generally, in the case of Spawn, it was a dual PhD from Brown University, guy born in Jamaica, a very interesting man who I was introduced to by the CMO of my last startup at Metrios, David Wilson, who became the CEO. And so we married David to the team, forced him to quit Cisco. He was willing to do so because there was now capital available to the company, so he didn't have to starve his young family. Right. But he was willing to take the risk because he was going to make,
about 40% of what he was making before, because he saw the opportunity and wanted to drive to the opportunity. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely.
Like tomorrow, this company we're going to hatch, it's a really smart CEO type, biz dev, he's got some experience, but his risk was the engineering side of getting what's going to be called contextual collaboration to market. But I happen to know a guy who wrote the code for the only 2 revenue-producing products of Bazaar Voice, and also was a code writer for a company here in town called Socialware. I know him. He's not necessarily a free agent, but you can marry these people together and then add this virtuous capital to it, and then you create something that's really good. And it's an idea whose time has come, in our humble opinion.
That's great. Thank you. Let's start opening up for questions that you may have of Joel. Feel free to go to the microphone if you would, so that we can record it on the videotape. There's 2, one on either side.
I've been looking at maybe some biotech companies and the time to market and even commercialization for even the most fantastic, promising technologies. Obviously, maybe don't work in the micro model at all, and mostly it's all this. So is it just the larger funds those folks have to go to because only they have the resources for the long haul through clinical trials, et cetera?
That is the absolute truth. So if you're in a business, the first thing to know is know your target and who your potential funding partners could be. In anything to do with biopharma and biomedical related, except devices, I would say you have to have extremely patient capital, because the FDA process and the regulatory process is quite lengthy. But there's a very defined path to funding. And I'm going to give you a resource. His name is Dr. Dennis Stone. And he is at a firm called Remeditex. Remeditex, just like I said it. Or just search Dr. Dennis Stone. He was at UT Southwestern in Dallas. He did a biopharma deal called Riata Pharmaceuticals, very successful. We actually were in that inadvertently through a fund called StarTech. And it's done extremely well. And Dennis is a great guy, and I was at drinks with him just the other day, and he told a publisher of a local paper that Lyda Hill, who backs him, believes absolutely that her wealth should go towards patient capital inside the biopharma arena, so that they can fundamentally make differences within the UT health system and up in Colorado. That's because she has a summer home in Colorado. So definitely, it definitely takes a long time. Their view, though, is 10 years. My view is 18 months to 3 years. It's a dramatic difference.
And I like to add that the speaker last week, Gail Page, runs a publicly traded medical company, and I suggest you look at the video that we'll eventually put up in a couple of weeks, because that'll give you some other insights. I think technically, Joel, the average biopharma deal from entry of VC to exit is about 15.8 years now. And more importantly, they rarely get to end product. You have the big bio companies coming in and buying them just before the end of phase 2 trials today, which is that kind of 15-year market, unless they can get public before, to keep the public capitals funding them, not the private capitals.
Exactly. So capital follows very interesting rules, and it always has. So keep that in mind. I wanted to show you these couple slides again. That in this particular slide here, and all the data for this is from Crunchbase and available to you on their website. You can see it here. It's called buzzsparks.org. But the average funding in my world is $25.7 million, with the average exit of $202 million. But we've further refined that the average IT exit, meaning information technology exits, in the second quarter of 12 is at $140 million. With these are less than 1 times capital. I mean, greater than 1 times capital, 1 to 4, 4 to 10, and higher percentages. So 53% of those are at 4 times capital or greater. So keeping in mind, for the finance guys in the room that like equations, the equation has to work for the fund. So that's why I said micro VC is in vogue. It's going to be extremely in vogue because if you know the average exit's 140 million in your space, your information technology space, then you have to get a return of fund potential out of every single transaction you do. So the max, so your fund size needs to be within the relative range of ownership for that average exit. So if the average exit's 140 million and the venture guy owns half of that, that's $70 million. So that needs to be sort of the top end of the fund. And if you think through that logic, it'll make a lot of sense to you in what my earlier comments were, because finance follows very predictable patterns. However, in the venture world and in the world of biopharma, it looks like this. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of noise, and it's how do you filter out the noise that I think in the long run that makes sense.
We have another question.
Just a quick question. Would you fund a product that has customers, cloud-based product, but doesn't have necessarily a business model?
It has customers but no business model?
Yeah, or not a proven business model.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's revenue coming in, but it's, whether this one's the right one to go down or not, depends.
So that would mean then that there's some business model there. You just don't know what path yet the true business model is going to take. Exactly. I was talking to a venture guy earlier today here in the hotel, and we like funding companies that have the potential for multiple options as it relates to the application of a specific technology to a market. So even though you don't have the exact model done yet, if you know you're adding value because you have customers, you're going to smoke it out. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is depends.
I guess a follow-up.
I will add, I was an accelerator judge for South by Southwest this year and as well as last year.
Yes, ma'am.
And one of the massive differences I saw in the finalist 40 companies from worldwide applications was singularly this year, every time we asked, well, what was your business model or where you're going to get your revenue from, everyone gave the same answer as you. We don't know yet, but we'll work it out. And that was not true 12 months ago at South by Southwest. So all of those digital media, social media, and other types were still working out their business model the same as you are.
Cool. All right. Sounds good.
Other questions?
So I'm going to, before we run out of time, and since a couple of people have already been brave enough to ask questions, I brought these as bribes, and I forgot I have them as bribes. So I told Laura she was going to get the first one. This is a book written by Sam Wiley and his son Andrew. It's unabashed. Texas got it right, and it really tells you why Texas is so great. That's what we love about it. And so those that have already asked questions, you get the first crack, and then I think I have two more. So I've already given away the books. But that's a plug for Sam's book, but it's also a plug for staying here and making it happen here, which some of us are proud we've done. I know Laura is, so she's been banging around here as long as I have.
Hold on.
All right, longer.
Let's rephrase that. We've been building the ecosystem for a very long time.
Right.
But it's here, guys. It's
building
here.
The ecosystem.
But thanks. This is Sam Wiley. Texas got it right, and Sam's the 6 times billionaire building company. Sir, your question.
How does someone go from having that initial idea that could potentially be revolutionary, but having no business yet, and then getting people like yourself to invest in it later on?
Great question. Hard to do, but it's done. So reach out to guys like me, and you should be able to have access. There's a lot of people you can have access to. There's not only the venture teams here in Austin, there's also Capital Factory, there's the Austin Technology Incubator, there's Tech Ranch. There are a number of incubators that I would suggest going to.
There's actually 22 different startup environments in Austin today where you can get some help. And if I may add, Joel, and here at the university, if it's still in idea stage, if you actually have an idea, There's a course in the engineering school, you don't have to be an engineer, called Idea to Product. There's 3-day startup where you can go in with an idea and try and validate its market acceptance. That's run through ATI. So there's several different vehicles, and I'll be happy to talk to you later about some of them you might want to consider.
Okay.
So are you an engineer or are you the business?
No, I'm physics major.
Okay.
Physics major.
Well, okay.
But
Right.
yeah,
Okay, so you're the brainiac with the idea.
yes.
Great.
hopefully.
Great. Refine it. Make as much sense of it as you can. Get it, if it's something you can eventually show me, the quicker you can model that, the better. So work nights and weekends to get there.
Okay.
Don't be too willing to give your IP away too fast, but be willing to seek out people whose job it is to help you. So the accelerators are a great place to start. Pitching a VC and just coming and trying to get time. So you have to have molded it into something enough to talk about, and generally 10 or 15 minutes of talk
Okay.
is all it takes to spark the idea.
Right.
So I'm going to interrupt and ask a quick question. How long before you get bored with an entrepreneur in front of you? If it doesn't capture your attention, how long do they get to capture your attention? Be truthful.
If it's in the morning and I've had my coffee, they've got 5 minutes. If it's in the afternoon and I've had a long lunch, maybe 30 seconds.
Mine is 7 minutes.
But we
So-
do not allow anyone to pitch to us any longer that hasn't previously submitted their plan. So if you're in front of me, I've already said I want to hear it. And if you're in front of me and I've said I want to hear it, which is different than when I hear pitches in a large room, because we do pitch day stuff, and I love going to them. I really, really do. And I love trying to give as honest feedback as I can. A lot of people tell me my problem is I'm too honest. Maybe too direct and honest. But I want to do that because it's sort of like when you watch the singing shows and someone sort of sucks, but everyone hates, what's his name, Simon, because he tells them, God, you suck. But everyone else is going, oh, well, she looks pretty and she's got nice hair. Well, it's a singing competition. You suck. Go away. Okay, so, but generally speaking, just to give you some numbers, we have seen 600 transactions this year. I've done greater than 200 live pitches. I'll do more than 300 before the year's end. Of those live pitches, we'll do 1% of those.
Wow.
So the numbers are dramatic. Part of that is fine-tuning what we really want to do. So if your pitch has to do with cloud and the ideas that we've generally been talking about, and I'll end on an idea before we wrap up, then I really want to hear that. And I do my best to try to hear it. But the honest-to-God truth is you got to come in guns a-blazing.
Really got to convince them. Sir,
Thank you.
When you started out, just out of college, I guess.
can you speak into the microphone a little bit more?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
How did you go about raising funds originally, and how is that different from what you do now? And if you guys do any leverage buyouts, how do those work exactly?
Okay, so I was lucky in a lot of sense of the imagination. But I was really unlucky. So when I got out of graduate school, it was 1988. 1988 in Texas was the banking failure. And I had received an offer to go to what then was called M-Bank. M-Bank was a very large Texas-based holding company. It had already begun to fail. And so my job was to go to M-Bank to get to M-Venture, which was the venture arm of this banking holding company. And it wasn't going to work out. So my path derailed right then and there, and I got a job to stay in banking, but went across the street with some guys that restarted a bank called First City, which ended up failing too. But anyway, I concentrated on leverage buyout financings because we recognized that the junk bond market was going to collapse, and which it did in the bust. Mike Milken went to jail, la la la. This is ancient history finance people in the room. But what we realized was there was still a robust market to do leverage buyout financing. And I had the very, very good fortune of building a pretty interesting portfolio. One of them, through a really interesting story that's only good over beers, I got to meet and finance Jerry Jones' purchase of the Dallas Cowboys. And it was a pretty big transaction at the time. I'm the guy that broke the back of the NFL. Through financial leverage, I figured out a way to not only break, but blow away the debt ceiling for the general partnerships of NFL teams. Now, you may think, oh my, she's horrible. But I guarantee you, if you go to any stadium in the NFL, Jerry World's one of them, all of them are built big, beautiful, and fun places to go watch football because of us breaking the debt ceiling limit. Because of that transaction, Jerry's oil and gas partner, as well as the Jones family, always kept me sort of looking at the stuff they did. And in 1995, they did an internet deal that drove me crazy. And they always gave me the stuff to look at, even though I had gone on to work for the Japanese because Laura knows they were going to own the world back then. Mm-hmm. So I'd gone to work for the Japanese. They were never going to run out of money. But that fell into a really lucky partnership where Mike McCoy, who was Jerry Jones's oil and gas partner, said, hey, Joel, let's just go do this for fun. I said, hold the phone. Are you serious, Mike? And he goes, yes. I said, now hold the phone. And I went to my boss. He called me, obviously, during banking hours. I went to my boss and I said, I'm quitting. I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice. I'm finally going to go be a private equity guy. And I went back into the other room, got on the phone, and said, Mike, are you still there? And he goes, yeah. And I go, I just want you to know I just quit my job, so this better be real, or Sherry, my wife, will kill you. So that's how I got my first capital. But it wasn't a fund. As Laura knows, I was knocking on doors, begging people to give me a little ounce of respect. Please let me throw some money in. Please let me be a VC. And Laura, as well as Terry Rock and a couple of really nice people, mentored me. And the idea was, Joel, and I was back. I didn't have a fund. It was really Mike. It was his back pocket. He was a big oil and gas guy. He would let me drill a dry hole, and he gave me basically 20 dry holes, up to $500,000. I could have 20 dry holes in a row if I did, or if I hit it out of the ballpark. And we did okay. The world fell apart, but we did okay. And that got me to my first startup, which Mike lovingly backed and released me to go be the CEO, and I got my first CEO gig because I went to go get experience, because I knew that people wanted to back VCs that knew a little bit about the industry they were investing in. And then I leveraged 9 years of experience to raise this fund. And now I've raised a pool of capital, and I manage a pool of capital that's committed, and primarily by the Sam Wiley family.
Some lessons to be learned about failure can be good, and failure can be extra experience for you, but success is even better, right?
I think it's persistence.
Persistence.
I mean, if you just remain persistent, and I've told my boys this all the time, you got to have a vision, and you got to have the desire to go do it, and you just got to find something you love. In a funny kind of quirky way, I really love what I do, and if that passion and persistence will carry you all the way, honest.
Thank you. Next question. Whoops, who was next?
I think I was
Okay,
next.
please.
He's been trying a while.
Okay, so I currently work at the university as a postdoctoral researcher. I recently discovered a novel compound that can be used as an antibiotic. It's effective against pretty much all bacteria, including multi-strain drug-resistant ones, because it works by a completely different mechanism. So I was wondering what the best way to pitch this to a venture capitalist would be. I'd probably need about $150,000 for the initial stages of funding to do a full scan of all relevant compounds, and then probably another $2 million for the animal studies.
Well, first and foremost, does the university have claim to the IP?
I don't know.
So you got to get that answered.
Yeah.
And if they do, you're going to have to go through the normal process of granting the university a royalty and asking permission to take this idea out of the university. By the way, it's done. Many of you may not know this, but Laura's responsible for the ATI, and I leverage buyout DTM that you spun out
That
years
was
ago.
a spin out from a PhD student in selective laser sintering. So we
check
can
that box first.
We can talk about this afterwards, and I'll tell you who to go to check that box.
And then the second thing I would do is I would put together your thinking and your own initial research, not 20 pages.
No.
20 pages of thought reduced to maybe 2 pages, and get it to a guy like Dennis Stone at Remeditex or some of the other people we can introduce you to who will fund you initially and have patient capital to go all the way.
Okay, and I guess one other thing. I actually have the money in order to fund this myself. What would be the advantage of bringing in a venture capitalist to do this as opposed to just going forward with my own money?
Good question. Mr. Virtuous VC?
You ever heard that story, all your eggs in one basket?
Yeah.
Okay. So put enough eggs in your own basket that you get to hold the basket, but don't put so many eggs in the basket that you're so worried about the basket, you don't get anywhere. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's like when you fill up your coffee mug in the morning. How many of you get mad at yourself because you fill it right to the top, and then you have to do one of these? And then if you look at it, it spills. So what do? You only fill it to a ½ inch below. Like when you go to Starbucks, never say no room for cream, because then they fill it too full and the thing leaks.
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
Okay.
I'd also add to this, if you're the sole source of funding at this point, and someone wants to come in a later round of investment, you're easy to wash out, as we would say. You don't have other partners with you, and it's always nice to have more than one partner. You rarely see VCs go into a deal where they're the only capital source. There's reasons for that, and we can talk about that later.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I'm going to get to the last two questions very
Okay.
quickly, because I promised to stop. We'll be 2 minutes late tonight, guys, but
Will you consider to fund the development of new programming language?
It depends, but the short answer again is always going to be yes. But it's what are you targeting with this language, and is it really a breakthrough? So if it's a if it has the wherewithal to create a platform like we did at Metrios, we're taking ancient dialogic code that used to be in hardware into software for media translation, and you need something to glue that together because IP is not nice to voice. And we created something really special there that's now called Call Designer inside of Cisco. The answer is yes, right? Because I can clearly see that through. But if you're telling me it's a better version of HTML5, which I've been saying forever, HTML5 probably won't take off like everyone thinks it will because it's better to have a native app, the answer is no. So it's always going to be more complex than a simple yes or no. But I've been saying if you have relevant domain expertise and you've found a breakthrough way to make things simpler and better to program, then yes, that is a fundable idea.
and I would say grab him afterwards at the cocktail session. Perhaps
Yep.
you can get a more private and specific answer.
But better yet, just ask me for my card. It's joel@trailblazercapital.com. How hard is that to know? And send me a summary, and I'll tell you in 2 seconds whether I believe it's a plan or not. And I will tell you, I will respond to you.
Last question.
All right. A lot of these companies that you've talked about funding, a lot of them seem to be targeted to a specific buyer almost immediately out the gate. You were talking about the GameStop deal. I'm assuming Metrios probably has a buyer already in mind. That part of being your 18-month turnaround.
Right.
What do you do exactly, though, if you don't get to that buyer? If that buyer just looks at you and moves on, what's your salvage plan for some of these?
Well, so far I haven't had to experience that. So, where's wood?
Would.
So I guess that's the other sneaky thing that I figured out that most venture capitalists are pretty dumbass about. You'll have to bleep that.
I'll have to delete that.
Is they don't begin with the end in mind. Remember, my job is portraits of dead presidents, and I don't turn down any transaction as long as it's the bigger president than the one I gave you.
All right.
So I begin with the end in mind, and I've driven every one of them to fruition through the end in mind. In some cases, I have a broader group I'm going to sell to. The secondary sale, by the way, in Spawn Labs was Microsoft. For a month or more, Microsoft kept telling us, nah, we're not interested. In the quiet period, post-sale to GameStop, guess who came a-knocking? Microsoft. When I began Metrios, the exit was always Cisco. Cisco bought it. And I can tell you every exit for every company I have. So you've got to begin with the exit in mind. It's better to know, and almost in every case, a market has 2 primary leaders, and then in some cases a tertiary and then others. And all of those are your primary exit targets. But you got to begin with the end in mind. That's what M&A is all about. That's why I only talked about the M&A stats. I've only been lucky enough to take one public once. I've only been lucky enough to have one of my companies bought and then taken public by a public company. So it became public instantaneously through an offering out of the many, many deals I've done. All the exits primarily are private. Public company, private public purchase of a private company. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank
All
you.
right.
And on that note tonight, we're out of time. I encourage you to join us in the reception and talk to Joel more. I'd like to join you to join me in thanking him for this fabulous discussion tonight.